Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar from Identity Experts. Today we're talking about how Zero Trust is leading the secure hybrid identity revolution. With me today is my colleague Matt Fernandez. Matt, do you want to say hello and a little bit about yourself?
Afternoon, everybody. I am Matt. I'm CTO with Identity Experts, and I am involved with everything kind of cloud security. Everything M365, everything fun and innovative, anything that Microsoft is desperately trying to sell the higher license tier for, that's all the stuff I'm passionate about.
Excellent. And my name is Jason Banks. I'm the Head of Strategy and Innovation at Identity Experts. I'm coming more from the, if you like, the traditional identity world of identities, meta-directory and account provisioning, and meeting somewhere in the middle. So a little bit about Identity Experts themselves. We were founded in 2014. We've been working in the identity space since then, and before then, most of our staff have got plenty of real world experience beforehand. And a lot of what we're talking about today has come out of real world technical challenges, customer needs, and is basically forming the foundation of what we're looking at. Do you want to add anything to that, Matt?
Yeah, I'll just add as well, we do an awful lot of work with Microsoft, with the engineering teams and with the teams behind some of the products that are being deployed. We're recently one of two partners that was involved with the security and Sentinel workshops that we've been delivering through the UK, delving into kind of the new SOC capability from Microsoft and how we can use that to improve people's experiences with what would traditionally be a bit of a headache service.
Excellent. So for today, what we're talking about is secure hybrid identity, zero trust. And to do that, we really need to set the framework for that. So if you think about the old world where everybody was working on premise, we had a secure perimeter and we knew anything usually inside the perimeter was good. Anything outside the firewall was generally stuff we wanted to keep out. And the goal of identity and security was kind of maintain that balance, make sure we kept the good things in, the bad things out, controlling limited access in because VPNs really brought people inside the perimeter. But lots of things about this were positive, if simplistic and naive, because we thought we understood at the time what the threats were, we understood what the solutions were, and it was almost a checkbox exercise when building an infrastructure to say, right, put the network in, put the firewall in, put the VPN and remote access gateways in, within the boundaries themselves, go hog wild, because that's fine, you're inside the boundary.
Yeah, and this concept of what's in the boundary is good and what's out the boundary is bad was kind of core to it. It was very simple and black and white, and that's for the most part, if something was inside, it's because we put it there and we knew about it. And kind of with this diagram, we would have all the threat actors and all the malicious stuff, and that was all out there because literally if there was anything unknown, it was blocked, it was locked down to the wazoo. All of our critical systems, all of our sensitive stuff would be, locked down in secure places with no network access. And, if you wanted some data out of it, you'd have to apply in triplicate 3 months in advance, and then you'd be weighed on the way in and weighed on the way out. So heaven forfend if you needed the loo. But that in itself kind of stifled progress when we were trying to go to this new shiny thing of the cloud, and how, and what, as we say here, what we're told we should be today, in that we don't need anything from that previous slide anymore. We don't need on-prem. We don't need any segregation. Everything should be in the cloud. Everyone should be using their own devices because that means it really enables this whole work from anywhere rhetoric that we've been experiencing. And yes, okay, the world is moving towards this kind of remote working. But in this kind of scenario, when a lot of the material that comes out from the marketing, this whole bring your own device movement is pushed. Yes, okay, from a productivity standpoint, but also from a, if we can blend people's work lives and their home lives together, then we get more work out of people and productivity increases, because someone who puts their work laptop in their bag and leaves it turned off until tomorrow gets less done than someone who will respond to an email while they're on the sofa watching Netflix.
Yeah, it also gives a lot of positives in terms of things like the user experience and the fact that you can work from anywhere. And for those of us who have the opportunity to, they can go sit in the park and work.
In fact, case in point, last week with the sun shining, because I could tether to my phone and I had my laptop, I was actually sat in a forest in a hammock by a lake working. So I could work there so long as my battery lasted, which was very pleasant.
Yes, and there are positives to be had from all this. This isn't all about the whole let's get more work out of people. The whole work-life balance and user experience is equally valuable an outcome.
But often, I say but often, I'm not trying to slam the negatives here, but what is put across is an equally simplistic view of, you can just tear out everything that you've got, buy our highest level license, put in all of this stuff, and you'll be absolutely golden. And while that might be possible for a greenfield, for a brand new startup, for someone who has no past, it's not actually really, well, the reality that most of us are living in.
Oh, absolutely. Anything for a smaller organization like ourselves, it's very, very achievable. If you've got a huge legacy footprint, and you've got existing IT, you've got existing services, then not all of those are going to be cloud friendly. If you've got a mainframe sat in the corner, is that going to go to the cloud, or are you going to have to migrate the applications and data from that into something new to be able to maintain that service? Or are you actually just going to maintain that as an on-premise because it's actually simpler and more cost-effective to just keep the mainframe that you're already using? So I think as we're moving into this new cloud world, what we are finding is the shiny promise isn't quite as simple as we'd have liked. Not that it ever is. And so we're starting to see things like, multiple perimeters instead of no perimeters. So yes, there might still be an on-premise footprint, there might be multiple on-premise footprints, because actually we're accessing a data center to access one application. We've got to go somewhere else to access something else. We're crossing these boundaries continually, whilst at the same time people are taking advantage of that bring your own device and are becoming increasingly mobile. So if they want to go and sit on the beach in France, that's what they're going to do. So all of a sudden,
from a budgetary constraint as well, some people are much more willing. If you start a job and they say to you, okay, well, you can either use this equipment that's been provided to you by the business, which might be a 3-year-old laptop that's been used by someone else, or if you want to, you can go and choose your own machine. And they go, oh, fantastic, I'll go buy that latest shiny Surface or that latest shiny MacBook that's going to cost me several £1,000s, but is way above and beyond the budget that the business might necessarily assign. So by choosing that, they get something that they're very comfortable with and something that is super shiny and that makes them feel like using it more, which is always.
Yeah, it's always positive. And I think the other thing that we are seeing as well is the proliferation. So it's no longer bring your own device, it's bring your own devices. So it's a laptop, it's a mobile phone. As it happens right now, I'm currently sat on a personal desktop rather than a laptop at all, because actually that gives me the ergonomic keyboard, the multiple monitors, and all of those options, which I don't get with an office laptop.
Yeah, and devices not necessarily electronic. As you mentioned, you've got your ergonomic keyboard. If people are working from home more, we've now got, as basic as bring your own footstool, bring your own chair, bring your own thing that allows you to work and not get injured, because actually workplace safety is as important when you're working in a home office as it is when you're working in a collective building.
Oh, absolutely. So I think there are all these complications and challenges coming in that we're aware of. There's things coming over the future horizon. So Microsoft is certainly putting a lot of interest and effort into things like decentralized identity or bring your own identity. We've got shadow IT where people are bringing in their own tools that they would prefer to use. So people are bringing in things like OneDrive, they're bringing in, Dropbox, all of these different services because they are convenient to their working on their own device.
And it's something that they might be familiar with as well. If someone has used, we'll go with Google or iCloud, in their personal lives for a very long time, and the business then tells them to use OneDrive, it's much easier for them to not do that and to share a file using the service that they're familiar with, because, well, it's the same thing, right? I'm still sending this file to this person in a way that they can access it. So the end scenario in that I have shared that file and now we can work on it together is the same. So from their perspective, what does it matter necessarily which service we're using? And a lot of the times, I suppose increasingly now as the idea of the CASB is getting more widely known, people wouldn't necessarily have this visibility. And previously, okay, so a CASB was fantastic, a cloud app security broker, where in that very first slide where we have our perimeter, we have our firewalls and all of our traffic's being pushed through that, and that is being analyzed by our broker, then that's great. We can see everything that's going on in there. But as soon as you take that device and put it on home Wi-Fi or Starbucks Wi-Fi, how then do you get that same look into what's going on? Not to watch what people are doing, but to check that the services that are being used are in line with the level of security that the business is actually trying to implement.
Oh, definitely. And I think along those lines, that does lead us to this thing where there is this continual evolving and emerging set of threats, and threats are a very general term because that might be malicious actors, ransomware, viruses. Equally, it is things like people being an insider threat in inverted commas, where they are deliberately or even inadvertently taking data beyond the company boundaries and placing it somewhere where it is exposed, even potentially with the absolute best of intentions. They're not deliberately going out of the way to be difficult, but these things are starting to crop up more and more. And just because obviously it couldn't be as simple as all of that, the solutions that are available to us are also continually evolving and emerging. And speaking to vendors, it's not often, they'll quite happily come in and talk to you about their single strand. And this is probably something we'll touch on later again in the conversation. But they may not be aware that there are 3 other things materializing over the horizon, even within the same vendor, because these things are coming live constantly.
There's something that I thought of the other night as I was preparing some of these slides, and I was thinking about some of the shadow IT stuff and the decentralized identity and the network protection. And I was kind of brought to mind a river back in my GCSE geography class when the teacher was trying to tell us about why rivers are windy. And I was drawing a parallel that actually the users are quite like the rivers in that they've got an origin and a destination, be it geographically or in a task they're trying to do, and all they're trying to do is find the route between that, which is the path of least resistance, be it the type of rock it's got to erode or the service that they've got to do to achieve their task. So if it's too complicated, if there's too many blockers in the way, if there's too much process that they don't understand or they don't know how to use, you bet your bottom dollar that user will find an easier way to get that task done, because ultimately they want to get it done. They don't want to be shouted at for not having done their work. So they would rather find an innovative way of having achieved the task. Yeah.
I think the other thing on that is, employees in particular are frequently encouraged to find efficiencies and new ways and faster, better, smarter approaches.
Think outside the box. Yeah.
Think outside the box. How can we get this job done that we've been doing the same way for the last 10 years? How can we do it better, faster, smarter, cheaper? And people put a lot of effort into that.
And that's partly, I mean, for the most part, people having those ideas and pushing the rules and breaking those things is exactly how the solutions and, to a degree, the threats evolve.
Yeah, definitely. So the solution to all of the above is nice and simple, obviously. That's the zero trust approach, with its key principles of trust nothing and verify everything. And the idea here is essentially summed up very, very neatly in that summary, that any time an access request is made, and this is where the diagram on the right hand side comes in, really, really applies. So we're inverting the old security models, and instead of saying you're inside the perimeter, we trust you, we're saying, well, yeah, we can see you, but we don't trust you. So we will assume that you're a bad actor until you demonstrate otherwise. We will assume that the device that you're using has been compromised. We'll assume the network that you're coming in is compromised. We'll assume that the resource that you're attempting to access is something you do not have access to. And it is up to the systems to collaborate together to actually say, no, we can verify that this person is the right person, that they are accessing from the right place, using the correct equipment, they're accessing things they are entitled to see, and they're doing so safely. And they're doing so safely according to a real-time analytic. So it's not just as simple as saying, do we know who you are? Do we know where you are? Do we know what you're accessing? It's actually that real-time, you're looking at that user's accessing and say, well, hang about, you appear to be in Brazil. Have you got a holiday booked? Is that right? Normally we see you in Coventry. Is that legitimate? Which it might be, particularly with people taking advantage of VPNs and services like Tor, or is that actually there's a bad actor who's managed to compromise your credential? So it's that ability to say, let's look at the whole picture as a holistic piece rather than just being, well, we verified the username and password, come on in.
Yeah, and I think one of the key bits in here is to a lot of old school security people, oh, zero trust. Okay, yes, we've heard that to death. It's an old fundamental of what we would do, and the title is the same, but what's happening underneath is evolving slightly with some of the innovations and the cloud stuff and the new types of attacks and the new threats and things that we're seeing. The point, I think, Jason, that you made about the systems needing to talk to each other is actually kind of the backbone of this now. It's no good having an MFA system in place if that isn't then receiving data from the user and location or the device condition or device security or locations and stuff. None of that matters. You could be receiving all of this stuff and they let the system through, and then MFA is just like, well, I'm going to MFA you anyway, which means the user experience is going to be crippled because you're going to be having, if you're accessing 30 different cloud services in a day and you're getting MFA'd every 20 minutes for every single one, that is a recipe for frustration.
Well, it's a recipe for users finding a more efficient solution.
Yeah.
And finding the ways to sidestep, work around, and otherwise reduce the overall security of the solution. And they are innovative.
But building on the whole kind of defense in depth thing, if our user and location are familiar and known to us, and they're working on a device that we can see meets the compliance and the level of security it has its hard drive encrypted. It's been logged on by this user and no one else. It's up to date on all of its patches, and they're using two of those things to access an application that we know that they are allowed to access and they do as part of their daily job. Then great, we'll let them in, because that information is then passed through the conditional access engine, which then can ascertain whether or not they are allowed access. And if any of those seem a little bit off or weird, it's that conditional access engine that is kind of the brains of it and goes, okay, well, I have seen all of this stuff. I'll scratch my chin and think about whether or not I actually need to put the ban hammer down on this, because there's something squiffy going on.
Yeah, or I'll request an additional MFA, whereas normally I wouldn't have bothered.
And this can help tidy up auditing logs as well. Instead of having to search through logs of 100,000 MFA logins because you've had 100,000 logins, now you actually only need to search through 10 or 11 perhaps, because they're the only ones that have had a raised risk level. I mean, of course, hopefully 0, but we live in the real world.
Oh, absolutely. So as part of the Zero Trust, because what we're finding is Zero Trust is a massive and ever-growing topic. Depending on which particular model you look at, that might be 4 pillars, 6 pillars, potentially more if you wanted to go down any environment or industry specific versions of it. So what we've been looking to do to try and help people adopt Zero Trust and adopt it efficiently and systematically is actually start with an assessment, because a lot of these things people have got, they've had them for years. So people have had MFA, that's not new. Conditional access isn't actually in and of itself new. Sentinel, SCOM, like all of these things have been around for years. It's the whole picture and how it's used. So what we've been looking at doing is actually building an objective yardstick that we can use. Look at an organization, look at how it is using its IT along particular lines of inquiry. So that'd be things like identity, devices, audit, and actually then providing feedback to say, look, this is where you are. This is what you look like in terms of your Zero Trust posture today. And then being able to take that in context with the business to actually say what we're going to do with that is now help you build a roadmap to say these are the things that you can fix quickly and easily in the short term that will improve your posture. These are the things you want to be thinking about for the medium term, and then these are the things that you want to be thinking about in the longer term. And so that allows people to say, well, actually, this is where I am. This is where I need to be in those areas that are most important and most relevant to me. So it isn't just a big checklist to say, here is the big Microsoft list of all the things that we'd like you to adopt. It's what do you have? Is it effective? Is it covering all of your use case scenarios? How are you using IT? Because if you're not using a whole section of a whole pillar of the process, there's no point saying, well, actually that's important, because it might not be for you. If you're a very small organization with a few hundred users, having a full fat IDAM solution is overkill. Having something to improve consistency and make sure that users aren't doing anything that they shouldn't or gaining anything that they shouldn't, and there are controls, yes. Do you need a 300-day project? Probably not. And I think this is that whole being able to take an organization, measure it objectively. I think it's the objectiveness is the key. Apply some context to it so that it has value for the business, and it's not just here's a one size fits all. And then produce that roadmap to be able to say, actually, this is what we think you should be thinking about next.
Here is the stuff that we can do in bite-sized chunks that can then be used to build business case for the other areas. So we want to take, the end game vision for the user experience team, the security team, the compliance team, identity and infrastructure, all of these people we want to pull together and say, well, what is your dream network? What is it that you really want and need? And then what are the bite-sized chunks that we can chip away to help build you the solid foundation for you to get there?
Definitely.
And that, as you mentioned, because everybody's different, and because not everybody drinks the Kool-Aid and will go, I am only going to use this person's products because they are the best at absolutely every single thing that they do. Again, we live in the real world. We know that different vendors have different strengths and weaknesses, and different products fit in different niches. So at no point will we say, oh, you have to strip out your existing piece of MFA and put this other thing in, because actually that might fit the bill perfectly for you. But what we can do is weigh up the options and say, well, okay, this is where it is now. Does that meet your vision of where you want to be further down the line? And here might be a journey of or a cutoff point maybe where it no longer fits the bill and what could be put in place.
Yeah, I think that ability to move things in and out of solutions is again something we're going to touch on later.
Well, am I getting ahead of myself? I do apologize.
No, it's fine. So looking at Zero Trust, we know it's proven. Yeah, it works. It's improving security across a whole range of organizations. But what we are seeing with it equally as we're going forward with these implementations is it's not always easy to adopt quickly or not easy to do well. You can pick up a fix, so you can say, oh, we'll go and enable MFA for all our users in Azure. Fine, that's a checkbox. But that's a point solution, and it's a bottom-up solution, and a lot of the risk here that might be introduced inadvertently is that these things are often done in isolation. So the Azure team might look at things and go, right, we'll go enable MFA. We're going to turn on governance for our Azure groups, but that doesn't help the on-premise team. And so if we move on to the next slide. So just walking through that as a slightly deeper example, if we look at something fairly simple in the identity space, we've got a traditional joiner process where Tim is going to co-work for Contoso. So he goes to HR, they pass his details through MIM or one of the other identity engines along, that gets turned into an Active Directory user account with any groups, they then enable him to access on-premise applications. And then we've also got Azure AD Connect, taking that and turning it to a cloud account where he's got his email, SaaS applications, collaboration, all of the good stuff that we want on a modern enterprise. And to be fair, that people expect now, they want to have that seamless experience where they just show up on day one of employment and everything is there ready for them. But what we are seeing is we have within that process some verticals that don't necessarily speak to each other. So, for example, the HR team will do HR things. They're interested in payroll. They're interested in making sure people got any certifications, qualifications. They're legally able to work for the organization. They're not interested in accounts. The identity team tend to be focused on moving everything around, but they're not that worried about user experience because they don't necessarily interact directly. On a lot of solutions, that's a background process, so it doesn't matter. The Active Directory team, they're thinking, right, we're going to set up the Active Directory, we're going to be looking at accounts, groups, service accounts, devices, anything falls within our space.
And making sure things that the identity team or the HR team or the cloud team don't fundamentally break things. I've often found that the AD, the infrastructure teams, are the ones that are the most careful about stuff, because still we're at a point where the on-prem domain is the linchpin of the entire organization, and if that throws a wobbly, there's a lot of big problems that happen. But they do tend to keep themselves a little bit isolated because they don't want other people finding out the secrets, as it were.
Well, not so much finding out the secrets. They tend to be very, very focused on what they need to do, which doesn't always give them time. And then similarly, you've got people working in the cloud space, and as you know yourself, some of that might be user focused in terms of, we're going to set up rules to say, here's the user, here's the mailbox. That's the whole user experience side of things, but then you'll have specializations within there around MCAS, Sentinel, SIEM, all of these things, because that is an ever expanding space.
Well, and actually, case in point, and the kinds of people that are then attracted to these different kinds of teams, it's represented quite well in kind of release versions. How many different versions of the Forest functional level are there? It's kind of happened with not every, but most major server version release. But how many different versions of Office 365 fix roll-up or in Salesforce updates have there been in probably like the last 30 minutes?
Yeah.
If you look on the Office 365 blogs, there's probably something, a new release every minute. And so a lot of these things in the cloud world tend to be, yeah, we'll enable that. This is new. This is fancy. We'll do this and that and the other. Whereas that is quite a scary and alien approach to when you're dealing with very slow moving, very business critical systems, because you can't just go and turn on a toggle and see what happens, because all it's going to do is change a logo or something. You have to do much more testing in all of the systems it's connected to make sure that all of that stuff isn't going to break.
Oh, absolutely. So I think this does lead to very different attitudes from different parts of the business, which are quite natural. And I'm saying that as part of the business. Even within, we're finding our own organisation and other consultancy organisations, there's a little bit of that internally. So I will come forward, and if I'm introducing myself, like we did today, I work in the identity space. And equally, Matt has joined the call, and he introduced himself as working in the cloud mobility space.
Which is why we're both on it.
Which is why we're both on here, because we're aware there is a weakness here in that actually we can't maintain that separation. And one thing I will point out before it does show up in the questions later, Azure AD Connect, I put in as a question mark as to where that sits, and that's just an observation that actually you plug in an Azure AD Connect or the Google equivalent, and there, because it's a pre-canned shrink wrap solution, you kind of you put it into the system, you keep an eye on it, but you don't really do a great deal with it, and it sometimes falls into a bit of a grey area where Active Directory team might look after it because it's an AD linked thing, or the cloud team might look after it, or an infrastructure team, or it might actually not have a clear owner. But it does tend to just, by and large, take care of itself. So it is one of those things.
It's one of those rare products where you're encouraged to make no customizations whatsoever, so that in the case of a disaster, you don't have to do too much fiddling. You can just download it, click next, stick a username and password in, and crack on with your day.
Basically.
Which does make it a little bit of a floater.
Yeah. So it's one of those things. No disrespect to Azure AD Connect. It's a fantastic tool that does a brilliant job, and that actually sometimes works against it from an ownership perspective, because, like I say, it kind of sits in this grey area. But that's just an observation on that one. So, secure hybrid identity.
Oh yeah, the topic.
Well, got there eventually. The main purpose of this was actually we were looking at how we were working, and it's things like what we've just mentioned about there being a separation. So we've worked on and said, like, there's three things which we see constantly. Every solution is unique. I've had this conversation several times with loads of other people, and they'll say, why don't we have standard identity solutions? And I frequently said, that's great, we'll have them, just as soon as everybody standardizes their requirements. And that's not going to happen because everybody is different, and we need to be aware of that. I think the other thing that we do say, and I'm guilty of saying this a lot, that identity is a journey, security is a journey, because these things don't go in and then stop. we need to be comfortable with the fact that we will put a solution together, we will deploy it, it will go live, and then the requirements will change. There will be a new tool, there'll be a new threat, there will be a new requirement. And so we need to design and build these systems with that changeability in mind. And that actually creates an opportunity as well. Because what that does let us do is say, actually, well, today we're in this situation, we need to get to a destination at point B, but actually there might be an interim step. And so it's taking some elements of, say, an agile type approach, where we can say, well, we're going to go from A to C to D, and then back to B where we actually wanted to be. And we're going to gain a benefit at each time. There'll be a purpose for each step. And we might be introducing or removing tools, products, components on each of those steps. But each one gets us slightly further closer to where we want to be. And I think the other thing, and I think this is the central point of the secure hybrid identity concept, is that actually security, identity, enablement are all elements of the same thing. It's inextricable. You can't have an identity without thinking about how it's going to be used and how it's going to be challenged. And you can't think about challenging for security purposes without thinking, well, where does that identity come from? How is the end user going to be experiencing that challenge? Is it going to be a gentle, oh, can we just check who you are? Or is it going to be the full cavity search, which we don't want to subject people to, because that's when they'll go looking for gaps and other solutions. So I think this is the bit where everything comes together and focuses.
With the enablement as well, the whole thing falls apart and becomes a bit pointless unless you've actually got people who are going to use it. So.
Yeah, and again, the idea here is if we make the security solutions and the authentication solutions as simple, painless, streamlined as possible, then people will go with that. They will follow the flow of the river, because this will be the path of least resistance for them. And they won't even think to go looking for something new, because actually everything that they need is at the fingertips. So taking it into the way that we approach this, we've got zero trust, which is brilliant. And we've got secure hybrid, which we're saying actually is a bolt-on and a wrapper around zero trust. And I think what this gives is a change of perspective more than anything else. So we have zero trust, which is going to be very product focused. I'm going to look at a point solution because I need to address my remote access for this particular application. Whereas with secure hybrid identity, we're looking at the whole piece from the top down before we go looking for products. So it is, what's the requirement? What's the user experience going to be like? How do we need to track that? We are a Microsoft house, but that doesn't mean we aren't looking at other things. And because we're looking from the top down, and we're then trying to match products to fit the solution, not solutions based on the products that we have at our fingertips. I think that's probably the key element there.
Yeah, we want the idea behind the journey is that you don't, when your kids reach university age, you don't just turf them out the door and say, go find your uni, go have fun, here's a backpack with a camping stove and a pot, good luck. You look at the whole thing. Where are they going to go? What are they going to study? How are they going to get there? Where are they going to live? And all of those things as a whole, there's lots of little bits you can chip away at which make the whole experience easier and simpler and more likely to succeed. And that's the same here. We want to look at the whole thing from a strategic level. Yes, we've got on-prem. Yes, we might have a mainframe somewhere that might be traditionally difficult to tie into. And we've also got this cloud stuff that might be hosted somewhere that's traditionally difficult to get into. So from a strategic position, do you still want them? Will it still work? And if the answers are yes, how then do we bring those in together so that they play nice? And what is that journey along the way?
Absolutely. So the way that we tend to engage with that is we're changing the way that we're using some of the language. So rather than it be identity as being the control plane, which is one of the things which gets said quite a bit around the identity security space, particularly in the Microsoft arena, we're saying, well, actually, trust is the control plane. Identity is an element of trust, but essentially, for a trust-first approach, what we're really saying is, who do we trust? So it's the people, actors, servers, resources, systems. What are they going to be accessing? So we can define that. And how are we going to control access to that? So what do we need to be able to say that that person is who they claim to be and is accessing something they are enabled or authorized to do, and we have explicitly trusted them to. So I think it's this back down to no more we'll be saying, oh, we'll just create a file share somewhere, put somebody in a group, job done. That might be the outcome.
We'll just spin up that Amazon S3 bucket and we'll just put the files there, even if it's just for a day. Yeah. Oh, did someone forget to put a password? Oh, whoops. It's easily done.
Oh, very easily done. But the idea is very much that we are defining that and saying, well, starting from nothing, who, what, where, what are we going to allow? And it becomes this emergent model in the end, but each piece of it becomes quite simple. The outcome might become very complex, but the actual moving parts, the levers, should be relatively straightforward and be able to be individually defined. So again, who do we trust? We trust Tim. He's been verified by HR and we're comfortable with that. He's going to access a number of resources on our network. So he's going to access to file shares. He's going to have access to some SaaS apps. And we're going to assign that by groups, which we're going to define and assign by role. So we'll bring in things like dynamic groups there, as well as things like birthright access. So a lot of these things are off the shelf, and we already have them in our toolkits. We're just changing the way that we're defining how we're going to use them. And in this case, we're going to use things like MIM and Azure AD Connect to control them on the ground level. And these are setting the user accounts up, they're setting the group memberships up, and then setting the stage for all the other tools to wrap around it. So when we look at the example of secure hybrid, where we've got our user as the focus, as secure hybrid identity is very user-centric. We can see that actually, yes, he's got a domain account, he's got an Azure account, he's got a number of groups across both AD and Azure, and any other services as required. We'll just roll the whole lot into that, so we can consider the whole lot as a whole. And we're going to be using the tools immediately surrounding him to create those accounts, manage those accounts, control the life cycle, control the individual access attempts, make sure everything's logged, checked. Does he still need access to this resource? He's had it for 3 months now. Let's run that through the governance process. When we're accessing an individual document, is he allowed to? Is it protected? Is it labeled correctly? And we can layer all of these things around the user when he's accessing all the resources which are out in the world. And that includes things like SaaS apps, collaboration, external identities. And because we've got tools like MIM, Azure AD Connect, and others, we can then link that back to legacy systems as well, on-premise systems, which gives the user the whole experience. But also gives us the ability to make sure that everything that user does is protected, wrapped up, monitored transparently and in the background.
And that transparency is a good point as well. In that middle ring around Tim, there's a lot of tools in there. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of checks. There's a lot of things creating signals that will be assessed. But the key to this is to be able to enable him actually to work in the most productive way that he can. So a lot of this stuff is geared deliberately to be at least translucent, if not transparent, right up until there's a point where they're needed and they can pop up and Tim can go, oh, okay, there's a problem. There's a clear message on my device. I either need to fix this issue or I need to go talk to this person about this thing and find out what's going on. And then once that's resolved, they just fade back into the background and he can carry on with business as normal. So at that point, he can work. He can do everything. He can work where he wants. He can, do what he needs. But the security is in place to back up that user experience with the auditing and the protection and everything that all the security guys like, so that they can see what's going on and they can assess stuff. And there can be proactive things running as well, so that issues can be nipped in the bud before any of that stuff is then surfaced to Tim.
Yeah. Perfect. So I think that brings us on to questions.
Well, we have one which has cropped up. Someone anonymous has asked, or has stated, that they don't use exclusively Microsoft services. So how would this model apply to them? I think some of this was covered in that, because of the way that we are now thinking about this, we're not actually focusing on products. We're focusing on the experience and the strategic vision that the business has. And the products themselves could be interchangeable depending on where you are in the journey.
I think so. And I think the other thing is, what we are very much aware of is there are other ways to surface product access, so we can still take advantage. So if, for example, somebody has a large footprint based on G Suite and still wants to apply things like MCAS over the top of that, even though that's a Microsoft tool rather than a Google tool, there are ways that we can look at actually setting up linking identities and making sure that the user might be logging in with an Azure credential to gain access to that G Suite application. So they're getting the right benefits at the right time from the right component. And equally, if somebody desperately needed to go the other way around, that's fine. We can reverse the flow on that and take a OAuth or a SAML request coming in from G Suite and turn that into a B2B, B2C, or even an application access, which allows us to expose Azure-based apps back the other way. So, and
also, it's quite important to note as well that although these the big names in the business are competitors, then they are not naive enough to think that they are the only players in town, and a lot of these solutions actually do have a way of hooking into their competitors' systems, because they know that if they didn't, they would be cutting off a huge part of the market that they would want to try and get to use their products. So it might not be widely advertised or like super in your face and up front, but the settings are probably there.
Well, even if they're not, the fact that all of the big, certainly the big cloud vendors in particular, are operating with known common standards. So things like OAuth and SAML for authentication, that's great. We can work with those, and we can get one cloud to speak to the other along those channels quite easily.
Yeah.
And while I can't speak for the Google side, the Microsoft embrace of services like SCIM for user provisioning creates lots of opportunities for having your downstream apps controlled by Azure, even if it's indirect.
I'm particularly excited about things like SCIM integrations combined with wearable biometrics and FIDO2. Being able to wear a FIDO2 enabled ring, and you can walk up to the front door of the office and full on do the Jedi hand sweep and the doors open, and that'd be a FIDO2 authentication and call me a nerd, but I can't wait.
Yes, we just need to wait for all those analog door systems to catch up with us.
Oh, stop ruining the dream. We'll do a roadmap. It'll be fine.
It will be.
Cool. And are there any more questions? Let's have a look.
If not, obviously, please reach out if you do have any questions after the event. Any comments into the channel, always appreciated. And assuming there are no other questions.
There are not. Yes,
Awesome.
Catch us on Twitter, drop us a line.
Cool. In that case, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure speaking to you about secure hybrid identity, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.